Donald Trump discovers his employee is homeless. Next day, she gets the shock of her life. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The sun was just beginning to rise over Manhattan, casting a soft golden hue on the towering buildings of the city. Donald Trump, always an early riser, arrived at Trump Tower with a mind full of strategies for the day. The office was quieter than usual, a rare calm before the hustle of meetings and deals that would soon flood the building. As he walked through the marble-floored lobby, he noticed a familiar figure hurrying toward the exit. Julia Hayes, one of his most dependable assistants. Julia was a woman who rarely drew attention to herself. She was efficient, meticulous, and always composed. Trump had often admired her work ethic. She was the kind of person who didn't require much supervision, yet something about her demeanor this morning piqued his interest. Her movements were hurried, almost furtive, and her usually pristine appearance seemed slightly disheveled. Wasn't much, a wrinkle in her blouse, a faint shadow under her eyes, but it was enough to make him pause for a moment. He considered letting it go. After all, everyone has off days, but the sight of Julia leaving the office so early, just as most people were beginning their day, stayed with him. Trump prided himself on his ability to read people, to see beyond the surface, and what he saw in Julia that morning was more than fatigue. It was the weariness of someone carrying a burden too heavy to bear. As the day unfolded, Trump couldn't shake the image of Julia rushing out of the building. During his meetings, his mind drifted back to her. She wasn't the kind of employee who clocked in late or left early without reason. Her dedication was unwavering, often setting an example for others in the office. So why had she been leaving at such an odd hour? And why did she seem so strained? By the time the afternoon rolled around, Trump decided to trust his instincts. He called his executive assistant, Karen, into his office. "Karen," he began, his tone measured. "Tell me about Julia Hayes. How long has she been with us?" Karen looked slightly surprised but answered promptly. "About 2 years, Mr. Trump. She started as a temp but was quickly promoted to a full-time role. She's one of the best we have, always on time, always delivering quality work." "Why do you ask?" Trump leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling. "I noticed her leaving early this morning. Does she have any personal issues I should be aware of?" Karen hesitated, her expression thoughtful. "She's very private. I haven't heard anything specific, but I do know she keeps to herself. No complaints, no excuses. She's one of those people who just gets things done." Trump nodded, dismissing Karen with a wave of his hand, but her response only deepened his curiosity. He decided to follow his gut and learn more. Something about Julia Hayes didn't add up, and he wasn't the type to ignore a puzzle. That evening, as the last of the office lights dimmed, Trump sat in his penthouse suite staring out at the city skyline. His mind replayed the brief encounter with Julia that morning. He knew he had a choice. Leave it alone or dig deeper, but the thought of an employee as dedicated as Julia potentially struggling in silence didn't sit right with him. Determined to find answers, he made a mental note to observe her more closely in the days to come. Little did he know, this seemingly minor decision would set off a chain of events that would change not only Julia's life but his own perspective as well. The city never truly slept, but its pace slowed significantly after midnight. Under the soft glow of streetlights, Donald Trump found himself driven by an unshakable curiosity. The image of Julia Hayes leaving the office early that morning lingered in his mind, her weary expression raising questions he couldn't ignore. Against his usual routine, he decided to take a drive, following a hunch that there was more to her story than met the eye. Passing through the quiet streets of Manhattan, his car slowed as he noticed the familiar neon glow of a 24-hour diner tucked into a corner. Something about the scene caught his attention. Peering through the large glass windows, he spotted a figure sitting in a corner booth. It was Julia. Her laptop was open, surrounded by a clutter of papers and what appeared to be a half-empty cup of coffee. Her face was illuminated by the soft blue light of the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. Trump instructed his driver to pull over and hesitated before stepping out. The diner wasn't a place he frequented. It was modest, a far cry from the luxury he was accustomed to. Yet there he stood, pushing open the glass door to the gentle chime of a bell. The smell of coffee and grilled food greeted him as he entered. The waitress, an older woman with a friendly smile, glanced up but quickly returned to her tasks. Trump's presence went unnoticed by most of the patrons, except Julia, who looked up and froze. "Mr. Trump?" she said, her voice tinged with both surprise and anxiety. Her hands instinctively moved to close her laptop, as if hiding what she was working on. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, his tone light but probing. He slid into the booth across from her, ignoring the astonished look on her face. "Late-night work session, I see." Julia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Something like that," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. He studied her for a moment, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way she seemed to shrink into her seat. "Julia," he said, his voice gentler now, "you don't have to tell me if you're not comfortable, but I can tell something's not right. Let me help." Her eyes flickered with a mix of emotions: reluctance, fear, and finally, resignation. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I've been staying here at the diner," she admitted quietly. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Trump's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? Where's your apartment?" "I don't have one," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "I've been homeless for a few months now. My salary covers food and basic expenses, but after an emergency drained my savings, I couldn't keep up with rent. This diner, it's warm, it's open all night, and they don't mind if I work here as long as I buy something." Trump was stunned. Julia was one of the most reliable employees in his company. The thought of her juggling the pressures of work while living out of a diner was almost incomprehensible. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, his voice low but filled with genuine concern. "I didn't want anyone to know," she admitted, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want people to see me as weak." He leaned back, letting her words sink in. Her determination and pride were admirable, but the situation was unacceptable. "You've been coming to work every day, giving it your all while dealing with this?" he asked, his tone incredulous. Julia nodded, a faint, self-deprecating smile on her lips. "I didn't have a choice. I love my job, and it's the one stable thing I have left." Trump felt a wave of respect for her resilience, but also a deep sense of responsibility. "You shouldn't have to live like this," he said firmly. "You've proven your dedication time and time again. It's time someone gave you the support you deserve." She looked at him, unsure of how to respond. "I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Trump, but I'm fine. I'll figure it out." He shook his head. "This isn't about charity, Julia. It's about recognizing your worth. Leave the rest to me." With that, Trump stood, leaving her with more questions than answers. But in her heart, she sensed that this encounter was the beginning of something life-changing. Little did she know, her world was about to transform in ways she could never have imagined. The next morning, Donald Trump sat at his desk, his thoughts consumed by Julia Hayes and the conversation they had shared at the diner. Her resilience and dedication were remarkable, but the idea that someone so integral to his company could be facing such adversity troubled him deeply. It was a glaring reminder of the struggles many people face silently, even while performing at their best. For Trump, this wasn't just about helping one person. It was about addressing an issue that could be affecting others in his organization as well. He leaned back in his chair, formulating a plan. This wasn't something he could delegate or handle through normal channels. It required a personal touch. Trump decided to call an emergency meeting with his senior staff to discuss the matter. The meeting, unusual for its impromptu nature, drew curious glances from his team as they gathered in the conference room. "Good morning, everyone," Trump began, his tone calm but firm. "I've called you here because there's an issue we need to address immediately. It's come to my attention that one of our employees, Julia Hayes, is facing a personal crisis. Despite her dedication and hard work, she's been homeless for months." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the group. A few exchanged glances, their surprise evident. One of the executives, a man named Richard, finally spoke. "With all due respect, Mr. Trump, why are we discussing this? Isn't this a private matter?" Trump's gaze was steady. "Private, yes, but it becomes a corporate matter when someone's personal challenges impact their ability to thrive, not because of their own failings, but because we haven't created an environment where they feel supported. Julia's story is a wake-up call. If it can happen to her, it can happen to others." There was a murmur of agreement, though a few faces remained skeptical. Trump continued outlining his plan. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I've already arranged for Julia to move into a fully furnished condo, effective immediately. Second, she's being promoted to a managerial role. Her skills and dedication have earned it. Third, I want HR to implement a system where employees can confidentially report financial or personal struggles without fear of judgment or repercussions." The room erupted into a mixture of reactions. Some applauded the decision, while others voiced concerns about setting a precedent. "Isn't this risky?" one executive asked. "What if others expect the same treatment?" Trump shook his head. "This isn't about handouts. It's about recognizing and rewarding resilience. Julia didn't ask for help. She worked through her challenges quietly, never letting them affect her performance. That's the kind of character we should be celebrating and supporting." The meeting concluded with a mix of skepticism and admiration, but Trump was resolute. He returned to his office, determined to personally deliver the news to Julia. Later that afternoon, he called her in. Julia entered cautiously, her posture stiff with uncertainty. "Mr. Trump, you wanted to see me?" "Sit down, Julia," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. As she settled in, he slid a small envelope across the desk toward her. "Open it." Julia hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked up the envelope. Inside, she found a set of keys and a handwritten note with an address. Confused, she looked up at him. "What is this?" "It's your new home," he said simply. "A fully furnished condo, yours for as long as you need it." Her eyes widened, disbelief written all over her face. "Mr. Trump, I can't accept this. It's too much." "You can and you will," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This isn't charity, Julia. This is recognition for everything you've done for this company. You've shown extraordinary resilience and dedication despite the odds. It's time someone invested in you." Julia's voice faltered. "I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem enough." "There's one more thing," Trump added, leaning forward. "I'm promoting you to a managerial position. Your skills deserve to be recognized, and this will come with a significant salary increase. I expect great things from you, Julia. Don't let me down." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "I won't, Mr. Trump. I promise." As she left his office, keys in hand and a renewed sense of hope in her heart, Trump felt a rare sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about helping one person. It was about creating a culture where loyalty and hard work were rewarded. Little did he know, the ripple effects of his decision would extend far beyond Julia, reshaping the very fabric of his organization. Julia Hayes stepped into her new condo, the keys trembling in her hand. The scent of fresh paint and new furniture greeted her, a stark contrast to the diner she had called her makeshift home for months. The spacious living room was bathed in soft natural light from large windows that overlooked the city skyline. A neatly arranged kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, and the bedroom boasted a plush queen-sized bed dressed in crisp white linens. For the first time in months, Julia felt the weight of exhaustion begin to lift. She stood in the center of the living room, her gaze sweeping over the pristine space, her emotions teetering between disbelief and gratitude. A part of her still struggled to process how her life had changed in a matter of hours. Donald Trump's unexpected generosity had not only provided her with a place to live, but had also given her a chance to rebuild her life with dignity. Julia took a deep breath, her chest tightening with a mixture of relief and determination. This was more than just a home. It was a symbol of hope. That night, for the first time in months, she slept on a bed. The softness of the mattress and the warmth of the blankets brought tears to her eyes. No longer surrounded by the hum of a diner or the uncomfortable hardness of a booth, she could finally rest. The simple act of lying down without worry felt like a luxury she would never again take for granted. The next morning, Julia woke up to a renewed sense of purpose. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, she stepped into her new managerial role with quiet confidence. Her first task was to meet with her new team. As she walked into the conference room, she felt a mix of nervous energy and excitement. The room fell silent as her colleagues turned to face her, their expressions a blend of curiosity and skepticism. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I'm Julia Hayes, and I'll be your new manager. I'm looking forward to working with all of you to achieve our goals." The room remained quiet for a moment before one of the team members, a senior associate named Mark, spoke up. "Welcome, Julia. We've heard a lot about your work ethic. It'll be good to have you leading the team." Julia smiled, appreciating the support. Over the next few hours, she dove into her new responsibilities, eager to prove herself in this role. While the position came with a steep learning curve, she approached every challenge with the same resilience that had carried her through her toughest days. Her attention to detail, ability to prioritize, and empathetic leadership style quickly won her team over. Meanwhile, Donald Trump kept a watchful eye on her progress. He was pleased to see her thriving, but he wasn't surprised. Julia's success was a testament to the importance of giving people the tools they needed to succeed. It reinforced his belief that investing in his employees' well-being wasn't just a moral obligation. It was also good business. As days turned into weeks, Julia's transformation became evident to everyone around her. Her confidence grew, and her ideas began to shape the team's strategies. She introduced new workflows that streamlined operations and encouraged open communication among her colleagues. Her ability to lead with both authority and compassion quickly gained her respect. Outside of work, Julia began to explore her new life. She used her evenings to take long walks through the city, rediscovering the beauty of a world she had once felt disconnected from. On weekends, she attended financial planning workshops, determined to secure her future and never face homelessness again. Yet Julia didn't forget where she came from. She began volunteering at shelters, sharing her story with others who were struggling. Her experience became a source of inspiration, a reminder that, with perseverance and the right opportunities, it was possible to overcome even the most daunting challenges. By the end of the month, Julia sat in her living room, reflecting on how far she had come. The condo felt like home now, a safe haven where she could dream of the future without fear. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. Her journey was just beginning, but Julia knew one thing for certain. She would make the most of this second chance, not only for herself but for those who might one day need her help. And as she closed her eyes that night, she silently thanked the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. It didn't take long for Julia Hay's story to reach the public. A well-meaning colleague had shared her remarkable journey with a friend in the media, and soon headlines about her rise from homelessness to a managerial position were splashed across newspapers and online platforms. The coverage painted a glowing picture of Donald Trump's act of generosity and Julia's resilience. But with the attention came complications. The world's eyes were now on Julia, and while some celebrated her success, others questioned the motives behind Trump's decision and the implications of her promotion. Was this an authentic act of kindness, or a calculated move for positive publicity? Julia woke up one morning to find her inbox flooded with messages. There were congratulatory notes from old friends and strangers alike, but also critical emails accusing her of being a charity case or suggesting that she hadn't earned her new position. She felt the familiar weight of insecurity, creeping in, a doubt she thought she had left behind. At work, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. While many of her colleagues admired her story, a few treated her differently. Some were overly cautious, tiptoeing around her as though she were fragile. Others were less subtle, making comments that questioned her qualifications. "Must be nice to get a promotion handed to you," one team member muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Julia clenched her jaw, refusing to let the words affect her. But the challenges didn't end with whispers and rumors. A major news outlet ran an opinion piece questioning the ethics of Trump's decision, suggesting that it set a dangerous precedent in corporate environments. Julia became the center of a debate she hadn't asked for, her every move scrutinized by people who didn't know her struggles or her capabilities. Donald Trump noticed the growing media frenzy and the tension it created within his company. He called Julia into his office one afternoon, concern etched on his face. "How are you holding up, Julia?" he asked, his voice unusually gentle. "I'm managing," she said, though her tone betrayed her exhaustion. "I didn't expect things to get this complicated." Trump leaned forward, his expression serious. "Listen, I know this kind of attention isn't easy. People are going to talk, and some of them will be unfair, but you didn't get where you are because of charity. You earned it through hard work and perseverance. Don't let anyone take that away from you." His words bolstered her resolve, but Julia knew she needed to prove herself, not just to the doubters, but to herself. She threw herself into her work, determined to demonstrate her value in her new role. She stayed late refining proposals and worked closely with her team to deliver results that exceeded expectations. Slowly, the chatter in the office began to shift from her backstory to her performance. Meanwhile, the media attention brought an unexpected opportunity. Advocacy groups reached out to Julia, inviting her to speak about her experiences. At first, she hesitated. Sharing her story publicly felt daunting, especially with the backlash she had already faced. But as she thought about the people who might be inspired by her journey, she realized the importance of using her platform for good. Her first speaking engagement was at a small event organized by a nonprofit focused on homelessness. Standing at the podium, she felt the weight of every judgment and doubt that had been cast her way. But as she began to speak, recounting her struggles and triumphs, she saw the impact her words had on the audience. People listened intently, some nodding, others wiping away tears. By the time she finished, the room erupted into applause. Julia left the event feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. The criticism and challenges were still there, but they no longer defined her. She was no longer just a story in the media. She was a voice for change, a symbol of resilience. As Julia's profile grew, Donald Trump watched with quiet pride. The decision to help her had been instinctive, but the ripple effects were more profound than he had anticipated. Julia's journey was inspiring others to reevaluate their assumptions about success, struggle, and compassion. Despite the challenges, Julia was beginning to see that the spotlight, while uncomfortable, could be a powerful tool for good. She resolved to continue proving her work's worth, not to silence the critics, but to honor the opportunities she had been given and to pave the way for others to follow. With her life finally stabilizing and her managerial position firmly established, Julia Hayes began to explore a new facet of her identity: advocate. The whirlwind of media attention surrounding her story had opened doors she never thought possible. Invitations from organizations tackling homelessness, financial insecurity, and workplace equity began pouring in. While balancing her demanding new role, Julia realized she had a unique opportunity to not only excel professionally, but also to help others who were walking the same difficult path she once had. One of her first major initiatives was partnering with a local nonprofit organization focused on affordable housing. Julia had spent enough nights in a diner to understand that homelessness wasn't always about poor decisions or lack of effort. It was often about circumstances spiraling out of control. She reached out to Donald Trump, pitching an idea to support this cause through the company. "Mr. Trump," she began in a meeting, her voice steady and confident, "I believe we can do more to address issues like the one I faced. Partnering with organizations that create affordable housing for working professionals could make a real difference." Trump listened intently, nodding as she outlined her plan. "Julia, this is exactly the kind of thinking I hope to see from you. Let's make it happen." With Trump's backing, Julia spearheaded an initiative that provided resources for employees facing financial hardships. The program offered temporary housing assistance, financial planning workshops, and mental health support. Julia worked tirelessly to ensure the program was accessible and discreet, understanding firsthand the importance of preserving dignity. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Employees who had struggled silently began coming forward, sharing their stories and seeking help. For many, it was the first time they felt truly seen and supported in the workplace. Julia's initiative not only improved morale, but also strengthened the company's reputation as an organization that valued its people beyond their output. But Julia's efforts didn't stop there. She became a vocal advocate for financial literacy, recognizing that a lack of education about money management often played a significant role in financial instability. Drawing from her own experiences, she collaborated with local educators to design workshops that taught essential skills like budgeting, saving, and managing debt. At her first workshop, Julia stood in front of a group of employees and community members, her hands slightly trembling but her voice clear. "I know what it's like to feel like you're treading water, trying to stay afloat, but I also know that with the right tools and support, it's possible to turn things around. I'm here because someone believed in me when I didn't know how to believe in myself. Now I want to pass that on." The room was silent as she spoke, her words resonating with people from all walks of life. Afterward, several attendees approached her, thanking her for her candor and sharing their own struggles. Julia realized that her vulnerability was her strength. It allowed her to connect with people in a way few corporate leaders could. Meanwhile, within the company, Julia's advocacy began to influence the corporate culture. Her team, inspired by her story and her leadership, rallied behind her initiatives. They organized donation drives, volunteered at shelters, and even started mentoring programs for new hires. The changes weren't just surface level. They were systemic, creating a ripple effect that transformed the company into a model of compassion and inclusivity. Donald Trump watched these developments with a mixture of pride and admiration. Julia's story had begun as an act of individual kindness, but it had grown into something much larger. She was bridging the gap between corporate success and social responsibility, showing that the two could coexist and even complement each other. Julia, however, remained grounded. Despite her growing influence, she never lost sight of her roots or the challenges she had overcome. She continued to work hard in her role, leading her team with empathy and a sharp eye for detail. Each success was a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of giving people a chance to thrive. As she looked out of the window of her office one evening, the city lights twinkling below, Julia reflected on how far she had come. The diner where she once spent her nights was just a few blocks away, a reminder of the life she had left behind. But now she was no longer merely surviving. She was thriving, and she was bringing others along with her. For Julia, this was just the beginning of her mission to create a world where no one had to face their struggles alone. Julia Hayes was beginning to feel the weight of her rising profile. While her efforts had inspired many within the company and beyond, they had also drawn criticism and, at times, outright hostility. As the new face of workplace compassion and resilience, Julia faced the difficult reality that not everyone welcomed her success. Whispers started circulating within the office. Some colleagues, particularly those who had been at the company longer, questioned her rapid ascent. "Why does she get special treatment?" someone muttered in the break room. "We've been here for years, working just as hard, and no one's handing us condos or promotions." Julia heard snippets of these conversations, but she kept her head high. She knew she had earned her position through grit and determination, yet the skepticism stung. One morning, an anonymous email landed in her inbox, accusing her of using her personal struggles as a stepping stone for career advancement. It was a cruel, cutting message, and for the first time since her promotion, Julia felt her confidence waver. The challenges weren't just limited to whispers and emails. Subtle acts of sabotage began to emerge. Files went missing, meeting invitations were accidentally overlooked, and certain colleagues openly challenged her authority during team discussions. It became clear that not everyone was willing to accept her as a leader, and the undercurrent of resentment began to take a toll on her. Determined to address the issue head-on, Julia called a meeting with her team. Standing at the head of the conference room table, she addressed them with a calm but firm tone. "I want to acknowledge that my promotion has brought changes to our team, and I understand that change can be difficult, but I want to make one thing clear. I'm here to work alongside you, not against you. My goal is to lead with integrity and help us all succeed together. If there are concerns or grievances, I encourage you to bring them to me directly. Let's address them openly and constructively." The room was silent for a moment before one of her team members, a senior associate named Karen, spoke up. "Julia, I'll admit, I was skeptical at first, but over the past few weeks, I've seen how hard you've worked and how much you care about this team. I think we all need to give you a fair chance." Karen's words seemed to break the tension. A few others nodded in agreement, and while not everyone voiced their support, Julia sensed a subtle shift. She knew winning over the skeptics would take time, but this was a start. Meanwhile, Donald Trump remained keenly aware of the challenges Julia was facing. He called her into his office one afternoon, his tone unusually serious. "Julia, I've heard about some of the pushback you're getting. I want you to know that I'm fully behind you. These kinds of challenges are part of leadership, but I know you're strong enough to handle them." Julia nodded, grateful for his support but determined to prove herself without leaning too heavily on his influence. "Thank you, Mr. Trump. I appreciate your confidence in me. I just need to keep showing them that I belong here." Trump studied her for a moment, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You've already shown them. Now it's just a matter of time before they realize it." Buoyed by his encouragement, Julia doubled down on her efforts. She began holding one-on-one meetings with her team members, listening to their concerns and finding ways to address them. Slowly but surely, she rebuilt trust and fostered a sense of camaraderie. Her dedication and transparency began to win over even her harshest critics. Yet, the true turning point came during a high-stakes project that required the team to deliver a critical presentation to a major client. Julia worked tirelessly alongside her team, often staying late to ensure every detail was perfect. On the day of the presentation, her leadership shone. The client was not only impressed but offered additional contracts, praising the team's cohesion and professionalism. Afterward, her team gathered in the office to celebrate. For the first time, Julia felt the walls of doubt and resistance crumble. Colleagues who had once questioned her now raised their glasses in a toast to her leadership. "Julia," Karen said, smiling warmly, "I think I speak for all of us when I say you've more than earned your place here. We're lucky to have you." As the room erupted into cheers, Julia felt a sense of relief and pride. The journey hadn't been easy, but she had faced every challenge with grace and determination. More importantly, she had proven that leadership wasn't about title or position. It was about earning trust and respect through actions. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at work shifted significantly. Julia's team began to rally around her, united by the shared successes they had achieved. While the scars of doubt and resistance lingered, they no longer defined her experience. Julia had passed the ultimate test of loyalty, not just by earning her team's respect but by staying true to herself through it all. With the challenges of her initial weeks as a manager behind her, Julia Hayes found herself at the center of a remarkable transformation. The tensions that once plagued her team had all but disappeared, replaced by a newfound sense of unity and purpose. Julia's leadership, rooted in empathy and collaboration, had begun to inspire not just her immediate team but the entire organization. One of Julia's first major initiatives as a manager was to propose a mentorship program. Drawing from her own experiences of struggle and resilience, she recognized the importance of guidance and support for employees at all levels. The program paired seasoned employees with newer hires, creating an environment where knowledge was shared freely and every team member felt valued. The program was a resounding success. Employees who once felt disconnected found themselves thriving under the guidance of mentors who understood their struggles. Julia herself mentored 2 junior employees, sharing not only her professional expertise but also her personal journey. The key to success, she told them during their first meeting, is to never let your circumstances define you. Focus on what you can control and lean on those who want to help you grow. Meanwhile, Julia's initiative to provide financial planning workshops began gaining traction. What had started as a small effort within her team expanded company-wide, drawing interest from employees across departments. These workshops, designed to empower individuals to take control of their financial futures, became a cornerstone of the company's new focus on employee well-being. Julia's leadership in this area was recognized by executives, and she was invited to present her ideas at a corporate leadership retreat. The retreat marked a significant turning point for Julia. Standing before a room of senior executives and department heads, she shared her vision for a workplace that valued compassion as much as productivity. She spoke candidly about her own journey, drawing a direct connection between the support she received and her ability to thrive professionally. "We talk a lot about maximizing potential," she said, her voice steady and confident. "But the truth is, potential can only be realized when people have the stability and resources they need to succeed. It's our responsibility as leaders to create that environment." Her words resonated deeply, sparking discussions that continued long after her presentation ended. Several executives approached her afterward, expressing their admiration and seeking her advice on implementing similar programs in their divisions. Julia left the retreat feeling a sense of accomplishment, but more importantly, she felt validated in her belief that compassion and success were not mutually exclusive. Beyond the company, Julia's efforts began to attract attention from other organizations. Nonprofits and advocacy groups reached out to collaborate on initiatives addressing workplace equity and financial insecurity. Julia found herself balancing her corporate role with her growing responsibilities as a public speaker and advocate. At first, the additional demands were overwhelming, but she quickly realized the impact of her work extended far beyond her office walls. One of the most rewarding moments came during a panel discussion on corporate social responsibility. Julia sat alongside leaders from various industries, sharing her insights on how businesses could play a role in addressing societal issues. When it was her turn to speak, she looked out at the audience, her thoughts briefly drifting back to the nights she had spent working at the diner. "I'm standing here today because someone chose to see my potential instead of my circumstances," she said. "That one act of kindness changed the trajectory of my life, and now I'm here to remind all of you that businesses have the power to do the same, not just for individuals but for entire communities." Her words were met with applause, and afterward, attendees lined up to speak with her, many sharing their own stories of struggle, thanking her for shining a light on issues that were often overlooked. Julia realized then that her story was no longer just her own. It had become a catalyst for change. Back at the office, the ripple effects of her leadership continued to grow. Employees felt empowered to share their ideas and concerns, knowing they had a leader who would listen and advocate for them. Productivity soared, not because of strict policies or increased demands, but because people felt valued and supported. The culture shift was undeniable, and Julia's role in driving it became a source of pride for the company. Even Donald Trump, who had always believed in fostering excellence, found himself inspired by Julia's journey. In a meeting with his senior team, he reflected on the impact of her initiatives. "Julia didn't just rise to the challenge," he said. "She raised the standard for all of us, and that's the kind of leadership we need more of, not just here but everywhere." For Julia, the ripple effect was about more than professional success. It was a reminder of how far she had come and a testament to the power of resilience and compassion. Each small victory, each life she touched, reaffirmed her commitment to creating a world where no one had to face their struggles alone. And though the road ahead was still full of challenges, Julia knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, leading by example and making a difference one step at a time. Julia Hayes' voice was no longer confined to her office walls. As her story and advocacy work gained momentum, she became a prominent figure in discussions about homelessness, financial insecurity, and corporate responsibility. Invitations to speak at conferences and events poured in, and though the attention was daunting at first, Julia embraced it. She knew the platform she had been given could shine a light on issues that affected millions, and she felt a profound responsibility to use it wisely. Her biggest challenge yet came when she was invited to testify before Congress. The hearing, focused on the intersection of housing affordability and workplace stability, brought together policymakers, business leaders, and advocates. Julia hesitated when the invitation arrived. She had never imagined herself in such a position, speaking before the nation's leaders about her personal journey and the systemic changes needed to address homelessness. "Do it," Donald Trump said when she brought up her reservations. During a meeting, "Your story is powerful, Julia. People need to hear it, and trust me, you'll do great." Buoyed by his confidence and the support of her colleagues, Julia decided to take the leap. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a whirlwind of preparation. She worked with experts to refine her testimony, ensuring it was both personal and impactful. She pored over data and reports, determined to present a compelling case that blended her lived experience with actionable solutions. The day of the hearing arrived, and as Julia walked into the packed chamber, she felt the weight of the moment. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and lawmakers shuffled papers, but she kept her focus steady. Seated at the witness table, she took a deep breath and began her testimony. "Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today," she started, her voice calm but resolute. "My name is Julia Hayes, and just a year ago, I was homeless, despite working full-time at a job I loved. I found myself unable to afford stable housing. My story is not unique. Millions of Americans face similar struggles. Every day, balancing work and survival in a system that often overlooks them." She went on to describe her journey, painting a vivid picture of the challenges she faced and the pivotal moment when Donald Trump extended a helping hand. "What saved me wasn't just an act of kindness," she said. "It was an investment in my potential, my future, and my dignity. And that investment didn't just change my life. It created a ripple effect that has transformed my workplace and inspired others." Julia's testimony wasn't just about her story. It was a call to action. She proposed practical solutions, from increasing access to affordable housing to encouraging businesses to provide resources for employees in crisis. "If companies and policymakers work together," she concluded, "we can create a society where no one has to choose between working hard and having a place to sleep at night." The room erupted into applause as she finished, and several lawmakers praised her courage and insight. Her testimony sparked a heated debate among the panel, with many vowing to take steps toward implementing the changes she had outlined. Reporters swarmed her afterward, eager for interviews. Though exhausted, Julia felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had taken her pain and turned it into purpose, and the impact was undeniable. In the weeks that followed, Julia's testimony became a catalyst for legislative action. A bipartisan bill aimed at increasing funding for affordable housing and workplace support programs began making its way through Congress, with Julia credited as one of its key inspirations. She continued to work with policymakers, providing input and ensuring the bill addressed the real challenges faced by those in need. Back at the office, Julia's colleagues watched her rise with pride and admiration. Her leadership and advocacy had transformed not only their company but also their understanding of what it meant to be a compassionate professional. The programs she had initiated within the organization were now being adopted by other companies, further amplifying her impact. Donald Trump, too, took note of her growing influence. At a board meeting, he reflected on the decision he had made months ago to help Julia. "What Julia has done is nothing short of extraordinary," he said. "She's shown us all that one act of support can lead to monumental change. And she's proven that leadership isn't about titles. It's about action." For Julia, the experience was life-changing. She had stepped into a world she never imagined she'd be part of, advocating for change on a national level. Yet she remained grounded, always remembering the diner, where her journey had begun. As she continued her work both in the corporate world and in public advocacy, Julia realized that her story was no longer just her own. It was a story of resilience, hope, and the power of believing in others. And while there was still much work to be done, Julia knew she had found her voice, and she intended to use it to make a difference. Years later, as Julia Hayes stood before an audience of young professionals at a leadership summit, she couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey that had brought her here. The stage lights illuminated her face, but her focus was on the sea of eager faces looking up at her, waiting to hear her story. "Leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room," she began, her voice steady and warm. "It's about lifting others up, even when they don't realize they need help. It's about seeing potential in people when they can't see it in themselves. I know this because someone did it for me. The audience listened intently as Julia recounted the pivotal moment when Donald Trump handed her the keys to a new life, a simple act of kindness that had set off a chain reaction of personal and professional growth. She spoke about the challenges she faced, the doubts she had to overcome, and the lessons she learned about resilience and compassion. That one moment didn't just change my life, she said. It reshaped how I see the world and how I lead. After the event, dozens of attendees approached her, thanking her for her transparency and inspiration. Many shared their own struggles, drawing parallels to Julia's journey. Each conversation reinforced her belief that stories of resilience and hope could inspire others to take bold steps toward change. Back in her office, now adorned with awards and accolades, Julia reflected on how much had changed since that fateful day when Trump had noticed her leaving the building early. The condo he had given her was still her home, but she had made it a space of her own, filled with memories of her journey and mementos of her advocacy work. She had risen through the ranks of the company, now serving as a senior executive, responsible for corporate social responsibility, a position she had practically invented through her relentless pursuit of change. Under her leadership, the company had become a trailblazer in employee well-being initiatives. The mentorship program she had started had grown into a comprehensive development framework, helping employees at all levels achieve their potential. The financial literacy workshops had expanded not only within the company but also into the broader community, offering resources to individuals struggling to manage their finances. And the housing assistance program she had championed had set a new standard for corporate responsibility, inspiring other organizations to follow suit. Donald Trump, now semi-retired but still deeply involved in his business empire, often reflected on the decision he had made to help Julia. "It was one of the best decisions I've ever made," he admitted during a board meeting. Helping her wasn't just the right thing to do, it was smart business. Her story, her leadership, and her vision have transformed this company and beyond. Trump and Julia had developed a relationship rooted in mutual respect. He admired her tenacity and the way she had taken a simple act of kindness and turned it into a legacy. She, in turn, appreciated his unwavering support and willingness to back her ideas, even when they challenged traditional corporate norms. As Julia's influence continued to grow, she expanded her advocacy work beyond the corporate world. She partnered with national organizations, speaking at conferences and working with policymakers to address systemic issues like affordable housing and workplace equity. Her story was featured in documentaries, articles, and books, and she was often invited to share her insights with leaders from various industries. Despite her success, Julia remained grounded. She made a point to visit shelters and community centers regularly, speaking with individuals facing challenges similar to those she had once endured. "It's easy to forget where you came from," she often said. "But the minute you do, you lose sight of what matters most." One day, as she sat in her office reviewing a proposal for a new initiative, her assistant walked in with an envelope. "This just arrived for you," they said, placing it on her desk. Inside was a handwritten note from a young woman who had attended one of her financial literacy workshops. The woman thanked Julia for inspiring her to believe in herself, sharing how the workshop had helped her secure a job and move into her first apartment. Julia smiled, tears welling in her eyes. It was moments like this that reminded her why she had fought so hard to create change. She folded the note and placed it in a drawer where she kept similar letters, reminders of the lives she had touched and the importance of continuing her work. Years later, as Julia prepared to retire, her legacy was undeniable. The programs she had started were thriving. Her advocacy work had led to tangible policy changes, and her story had inspired countless individuals to persevere in the face of adversity. At her retirement celebration, colleagues, friends, and leaders from around the world gathered to honor her contributions. Donald Trump, now a close friend and mentor, gave a heartfelt speech. Julia Hayes took a chance I gave her and turned it into a movement, he said. She showed us that leadership isn't about power, it's about heart. And because of her, countless lives have been changed for the better. As the room erupted into applause, Julia felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every struggle. She had turned her pain into purpose, her challenges into opportunities, and her story into a legacy of compassion and hope. Walking out of the venue that evening, she paused to look at the city skyline. The diner where her journey began was still there, a humble reminder of where it all started. But now she knew her impact reached far beyond those walls. It was a legacy that would endure, a testament to the power of resilience, kindness, and the belief that one small act can change the world.